All right, today we're going to cut through all the noise around a topic that's been popping up everywhere, Bitcoin ETFs. We're going to break down exactly what they are, why everyone's talking about them, and how they've created a whole new way to think about crypto.
Okay, but before we dive in, a really important heads up. This is all for educational purposes. We're here to help you understand the topic. That's it. This is not investment advice, so please, always do your own research.
So, let me start with a question. Have you ever been a little curious about Bitcoin, but then you hear words like digital wallets, private keys, and crypto exchanges, and it all just starts to feel, well, way too complicated? If you're not in your head right now, you are definitely in the right place.
To really get what a Bitcoin ETF is, we first have to make sure we're all on the same page about Bitcoin itself. So what is this digital gold, really?
So, in a nutshell, Bitcoin is a currency that only exists online. The most important thing to get is that it's not controlled by any government or bank, and, this is key, there's a limited supply. Only 21 million will ever be created. That scarcity is a huge reason why some people look at it as a way to store value.
Okay, that sounds pretty cool, right? But, and this is a big but, here's where things have always gotten tricky. Actually buying and holding Bitcoin yourself. Let's look at why that's been such a massive headache for so many people.
See, in the past, owning Bitcoin meant you had to become your own personal Fort Knox. You'd have to create a special digital wallet, then guard these super complex passwords called private keys. And then, and this is the stressful part, you'd have to constantly worry about getting hacked. And this just hits the nail on the head. You know, if you forget your bank password, you can just reset it. But if you lose your private key, your Bitcoin is gone. Just poof, forever. And for the average person, that is a terrifying thought.
So, to solve this huge problem, to get around all that technical, scary stuff, the financial world came up with a kind of bridge, a way for regular investors to get involved. And that bridge is the ETF.
You know, the absolute easiest way to think about an ETF is to picture a shopping basket. The people who run the fund can fill that basket with all sorts of things, stocks, bonds, gold, whatever. And you, as an investor, can buy a tiny piece of that entire basket on a regular stock exchange. And this is the aha moment right here. With an ETF, you're not actually buying the stuff inside the basket. You're buying a share of the basket itself. The fund does all the hard work of buying and storing the assets for you.
And this slide just lays it all out plain and simple. On the left, you've got the old way. Complicated, you're responsible for everything, and honestly, it's pretty intimidating. And on the right, you've got the ETF path. Simple, familiar, regulated, and you can do it all from the brokerage account you might already have. It's like night and day.
So how did this idea go from just a concept to something that really opened the floodgates for a whole new wave of investors? Well, the story starts with our neighbors to the north.
You know, Canada was way ahead of the curve here. They approved the world's first spot Bitcoin ETF, that's one that holds actual Bitcoin, all the way back in 2021. The US market, on the other hand, took a lot longer. But after years and years of saying no, the SEC finally gave the green light in January 2024. And that sent massive shockwaves through the entire financial world. And seriously, it was a huge moment. This wasn't just a big deal for crypto. It was the mainstream financial establishment building an official, regulated bridge to this new digital world. It was a massive sign that things were changing.
And of course, once that door was opened, who came rushing in? Some of the absolute biggest names in finance. We're talking giants like BlackRock and Fidelity launching their own Bitcoin ETFs, which brought this incredible sense of legitimacy and scale to the whole market.
All right, so this all sounds amazing, right? Simple, revolutionary, but, you know, with any financial product, there's always a trade-off. Let's get real for a second and look at both the pros and the cons.
So let's just walk through this. On the one hand, the advantages are pretty obvious, right? It's super easy, you don't need to be a security expert, and it's a regulated product. But the disadvantages are just as important to understand. You don't actually own the Bitcoin, which means you can't use it to buy things. You also pay a small fee for the convenience. And, maybe most importantly, you are still exposed to Bitcoin's wild price swings. The ETF makes it easier to buy, but it doesn't remove that risk. So, after all that, the history, how it works, the good and the bad, what's the final equation? What's the bottom line here?
It really just boils down to this. A Bitcoin ETF is basically a shortcut. It's a tool that lets you invest in the price of Bitcoin using the stock market you already know, all without the technical hassle of wallets and keys.
And that leaves us with one final
big question to think about. Is this easy button for Bitcoin the future of how we'll invest in all sorts of new things? Or is it just a new, more convenient package for an old, familiar risk? That's the big question the financial world is wrestling with right now. Thanks for tuning in.